I think that conversation is really difficult for a lot of, it was difficult for me when I first started having it, because you really have to, as a white presenting individual, you have to place blame on yourself in order to grow.
Welcome, everybody, to the Reptile Studio podcast with me, Greg, from the Reptile Studio on Instagram and the Reptile Studio on YouTube, and also Brian from Hudson Valley Reptile and Rescue, and Abby Stone from the Curly Haired Keeper on Instagram and the Curly Haired Keeper on YouTube.
Yep.
So welcome, Abby.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being on. So right off the rip, I just want to find out, before we get into all the other fun conversation, that who are you and what do you keep for reptiles? Because I know you have some super dwarfs.
Yes. So I just got back into the hobby a couple years ago. And I am focused on just all snakes right now. So I have 6 snakes, 3 different species. The majority of them are dwarf or super dwarf reticulated pythons. I also have a boa constrictor and a Colombian rainbow boa.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any boas, and every time I see a boa, I'm like, I need to get a boa, but I don't.
Boas don't like
I'm
me
good right now with what
Boas
I have.
don't like you. Oh, my boa would like you. He likes everyone. He's super chill.
Over the last 20 years or so, I have met maybe 5 true boas that actually like me in any way. For the majority, I'm the one that's like, oh yeah, no, go ahead, you could pick it up, Brian, it's perfectly friendly. Latches onto my arm 30 seconds later.
Oh no. Yeah, I don't know.
It's probably me. They probably just don't like the way I handle them or something. But yeah, generally boas don't like me. How large is your boa?
Mine, he's still young. He'll be 2 in April, so he's just over 4 feet. But I mean, he's a boa, so he's heavier bodied. But I mean, I've had some friends over with kids, like younger kids, and they handled him no problem. Like he just basically just kind of draped across them. It's like, okay, it's comfy. I'm good. Like he's great.
Nice. We have one now that's very calm and fantastic with me, just so everybody doesn't think I'm awful at boas. But the majority of them don't like me, but this one really does.
That's interesting. You know, you're not the first one that I've heard say this. Like one specific species just doesn't want anything to do with me. So interesting.
Yeah, Brian, I think it's just your general, like, overall negative aura that really
absolutely
sets them off.
Yep. It's you, not them.
Absolutely, 100%. I can calm monitors down, but boas, nope.
Oh, see, I feel like that's a better skill. It's like boas generally don't need to be calmed down. Right. They're pretty chill. Like the monitors, that's a good one to have.
So you don't have any lizards at all then? Right.
So my husband has a leopard gecko, but he does all of her care. Like he does the feeding and all of that stuff. Like I'll feed her once in a while, but like she's small and she has 4 legs. And I'm like, I don't know why. I'm just like, I don't know what to do with you because you have legs. I don't know what it is. Like bigger monitors and stuff, I'm fine with. Bigger lizards are just easier for me. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is. If you are tiny and have 4 legs and are a lizard, I'm very awkward.
That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, people like what they like, and they can, if they're working with what they really enjoy working with, then let it. You don't have to have everything. You don't need to have a lizard because it's a reptile and you like reptiles, you know?
Right.
Really open to it's really open to being able to keep what you want. That's the beautiful part about this industry that we have here.
So I don't know if you guys can see this, but hold on. I can't figure out the camera and the finger.
Oh yeah, it's always opposite.
I can't
And
do
that's
it.
why I use the background.
Right there.
Oh, a little face peeking out on the sky hide. Oh my gosh, that's cute.
I put the sky hide back in my carpet python's enclosure.
Nice.
And now it's pretty much just in there exclusively.
Yeah, they love that.
I was watching a video of Lori Tarini. Do you know who Lori Tarini is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was watching a video of hers where she was going through some of her enclosures or something. And
excuse me.
in one of hers, she had the sky hide, but it was attached with carabiners.
Oh,
So you can just detach the sky hide without
yeah.
having to cut like wire ties or anything, which I'm gonna do. But that's what inspired me to put it back up. But I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna get some carabiners.
That's a really good idea.
Wire ties or zip ties going, 4 zip ties, and then with a little and then the carabiner was like clipped onto the zip ties, which is a really good idea.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I like it.
Yeah. So your super dwarfs, all from Garrett at Reach Out Reptiles?
No, so when I was first getting back into keeping, I was so indecisive about what I wanted to get for my first snake, getting back into it, that I took forever. It was like, knew I wanted a snake, 9 months later, like got a snake. And a super dwarf was one of the contenders of, first snake to get, but I wound up getting my rainbow boa instead. So the way that but I knew that I wanted a retic eventually, a super dwarf retic. And JP from Underbelly Exotics posted on Instagram saying he got this, 50% super dwarf retic in a raffle. Like he won it. They were doing like a fundraiser for someone, and he won the snake, and he didn't have like really a place for it in his future plan. So he put it up for sale, but like 50% of what he was selling it for was going to go to US Ark. So I was like, that's a really good excuse to get a super dwarf. So I wound up getting him from JP. And I'm really glad I did. He's a really cool snake. But he was produced by Brian over at Hell Creek is the breeder. But all the rest of mine, all the other 3 that I have are from Reach Out, from Garrett.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know anybody, because I mean, in Connecticut you can't have any retics at all.
Right. And New York the same, right?
Yep. New York is extremely very what is the word I'm looking for?
Restrictive.
Yeah. Super restrictive here. I was licensed by DEC for a long time, so I've had the luxury of working with mainlands and all sorts of other big giant constrictors.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and you have boas too, which
we are allowed to have boas in New York.
Okay, that's changed.
They're not restricted at all.
Okay.
And in Connecticut we can have berms. But they're just, they're not the same, as far as just like that general, like inquisitive, that kind of like super intelligent.
Are you trying to say that berms aren't smart, Greg?
Well,
no, they're not. They're very placid and very calm by comparison. And there's not much, it's like a food response is pretty much what you'll see. But with a retic, it's like thinking about how it can figure out where to go in its cage to get out.
Yeah, it's crazy.
They're really, really smart. I would equate them to being, indigo-esque as far as intelligence level is concerned. Retics are brilliant.
I got a hold of Indigo for the first time yesterday.
Nice.
And that was super cool. She was awesome. I was over at a friend's house helping him kind of clean and build some new enclosures and redo his setup. And I got to move his Eastern Indigo from her. temporary place to her new home. But she was super cool. She did the whole like flatten her face out
Yeah,
thing
awesome.
when I first got her out. Oh, I was like, oh, you're not sure about this, but like just interacting with her and like calming her down was just so cool. They're so fast too.
Yeah.
Like retics can be fast, but like indigos are just a different experience in how they move.
They're a brilliant species. One of my volunteers has actually filled out all the paperwork to get her permits in New York State to be able to own one, actually.
That's awesome.
She's about 5 months in waiting, but we won't get into that right now.
Oh my gosh. So you think about Pennsylvania? Anything in Pennsylvania?
Well, you'd still need a federal license to own one, even in Pennsylvania.
For an indigo?
Yeah, for interstate commerce. Actually, they probably are breeders in state, so you probably wouldn't.
Yeah, I was gonna say you don't need to if you're just keeping them and not breeding them or selling them.
Yeah, I was gonna say there it's across state lines because of their appendix in cities or sites,
right?
However you want to say it.
That is, yeah.
So, Abby, you mentioned you were at your friend's house helping build or redo enclosures or something.
Mm-hmm.
What? Just out of curiosity, is that somebody that you were friends with, like, for a long time, like before, like Instagram and all that, or is this somebody that you met?
This is someone that I met through the community. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice. It's always good to help each other out.
Yeah, I love it. I love a project, and if it's a reptile focused project, all the better. I love it.
Yeah. So that's tough for me to find anybody like within a close proximity to like get involved with stuff like that with, to like work on projects or like, go see their collection and like hang out and stuff or for whatever reason. Like I met Brian because I was going to try and start a rescue in Connecticut. And so I wanted to get some information from him, but he's like an hour and a half for me. And another buddy of mine, Stunning Serpents, is in Pennsylvania. He was like a 3-hour drive for me, so that's why I was curious to see if it was somebody you knew or that you met. So it's hard to, it's difficult to find people close.
Right. Yeah. And it can definitely be like an awkward, like, I don't know about YouTube, but like whenever I meet someone new and I don't know anything about them, I don't know if they're like a reptile person, especially since I keep specifically snakes. Like, I'm either going to completely weird you out and be like, you're psycho, or you're going to be really curious about it and you don't keep animals, but you want to like, you're interested in it, or you keep reptiles and we have like some commonality. But yeah, it can definitely be kind of for me, like this awkward silence moment of like, oh yeah, I keep snakes. How are you going to react to that information?
Yeah, like I drove to John from Stunning Serpent's house to take pictures of his snakes.
Stunning Serpents.
Of his stunning. Yeah, he has an amazing. He was one of the first people I connected with on Instagram, and he has just amazing.
He has quite the pretty animals.
Yeah.
You said something, Abby, about some couple words you said of like saying like not being sure or being weirded out or whatever about something. But for me to drive 3 hours to his house, his like personal house, to take pictures. Oh, sorry, I gotta turn this down. Was
you're good.
Extremely odd for me because peopling is terrible. So
yeah, that's fair. That is one nice thing of living where I live is we're surrounded by other keepers. Like we already knew Garrett before we moved here. And then everyone obviously who works at Retail Reptiles is, a reptile or snake person. And I don't think Thomas owns any reptiles, but everyone else there is like they're like, oh yeah, just swing by, say hi, come like nerd out about reptiles. It's we've been really fortunate in that. Because it can be like if you are developing a new group of friends who aren't into reptiles and don't want anything to do with them, which is fine. Like that's fine if you feel that way, but it can definitely feel a little bit more isolating.
Yeah.
If that's the case.
Right.
So yeah, we've been really fortunate.
I think you were speaking about having a central location where people are like, oh no, you keep reptiles too, that's awesome, let's talk and hang out. I think that's a really big part of it.
Yeah.
Here in New York, everything that we would have had prior was basically closed. It's a situation where there isn't anything fantastical. There is no zoo that we can go to on a communal basis. There isn't a a really good reptile pet store, for example, in where I'm located. There are in other spots in New York State, of course, don't get me wrong, but 2.5 hour drive. I mean, I might as well go to a reptile expo for that. You know what I mean? It's very few and far between. And the people that don't always have social media, and they don't, whether they're older keepers or what have you, they don't always have a social media account, or they're not very public about what they're doing, or they still think that it's 20 years ago and they need to keep them in their basement and not talk about it because they're weird.
Right.
Whatever that stigma might have been. I mean, I lived through that. That stuff was fun. I used to love telling people. I mean, I took alligators into Petco and PetSmart when they first opened for pictures with Santa, and I'm like, your sign says any pet. I'm sorry, but that's any pet. That's his mouth is taped, and here's my licenses. Sorry, I'm gonna bring a gator in to take pictures with Santa. But we found a group of people here in New York State that, some of us have moved on and don't really keep that much anymore, but a lot of us were very meeting at central location of people's houses. And that always became a very personal, they had to kind of really click. And it wasn't just a mere acquaintance where, oh, I know him, he keeps reptiles too, or she has a bunch of frogs, or whatever the case may be. It was always more of a really tight-knit friendship after the fact. And sometimes that isn't always the case, right? Sometimes you meet people and they don't always click, even if they have reptiles. You're not always perfectly in tune with each other, and you may not want them at your house after the first couple visits. So I think that's just something that is relatable in, we don't have that central location to meet that's public, and it becomes a barring situation to creating these massive groups or organizations of friends,
Right. Yeah, there's no reptile version of a dog park.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And I think this is a common problem.
Gosh.
I think this is a common problem throughout the country. I don't specifically, I'm not just referencing right here in my location in New York, but some of these other rural areas all across the country. You have people that I talk to from, northern New Hampshire that there's really, well, I mean, there is something in northern New Hampshire, but there's a ton in Maine. There's a ton, tons of keepers all over the country. Email me, talk to me. And it's like, social media has brought that ability to talk to somebody from, we've even interviewed people who were 3 hours behind us in California. Like we've interviewed people from where did Jacob live, Greg? I forget. Was it Sweden? So it's a remarkable, it's a remarkable tool, social media, but I think there's a lot of negatives that come with social media as well. And I think Greg will take it from there. I think that was a pretty good segue, my friend. But it's a lot of negative stuff comes out of social media as well.
The reason why I brought that up too is because I know for me, I'm fairly sensitive to, oh no, I'm not fairly, I'm very sensitive to certain types of personalities. I don't I'll go to a concert, like a rock concert. It's been a long time, but I go to some rock concert, and the vibe there is like I need to have a lot of my like close friends with me, because the vibe there is very like, you know, angry macho kind of like, you know, just I don't know how to really put it into words, but that sort of vibe makes me uncomfortable because I'm not that like loud, boisterous, like, you know, in your face type of person. And like the reptile hobby, and I don't know if it's just my perspective, but that seems like it's sort of like the dominating personality type is like that like, you know, macho type of like, you know,
Loud in your face, do it my
loud
way or
in your
don't do it.
face, you know, just, you know, make a lot of money, you know, it just that turns me off, and that in that, which also I think turns me off from doing more to get more involved in it,
Mm.
you know. And I wasn't sure what your thought was on that.
I mean, I'm still decently new back into the hobby. I got my first snake again September of 21. So it hasn't been quite 2 years since I've been kind of diving back into it. But I totally get what you're saying, where it's really easy to feel completely isolated in a crowded room.
Yeah.
In situations like that, where you're like, oh my gosh, like I don't feel like I fit. Like I'm the outcast in a group full of outcasts, essentially. Like, oh, I'm the weird one in a room full of weirdos. So I think me personally, I haven't experienced a lot of the like kind of macho sexist side of it. I think that's starting to shift to be more welcoming. Like people like Megan Kelly are one of the biggest green anaconda breeders out there now. And I think that's done a lot to kind of shift perspective of like, oh, chicks can do this too and do it really, really well. So I don't know, maybe it's just that I haven't been around long enough to feel the impact yet, or just my own stance through like the posts that I make and the kind of ethics that I follow, kind of just barring that contact in the first place. I've definitely had people reach out and be like, hey, like I have a different perspective on this than you. And we just have a conversation about it. It's
Right.
not
in a healthy way.
Right. It's not oh, you're doing this wrong. It's let's have a conversation about this. And I'm happy to share with you why I feel the way I feel about this, with the expectation of I have zero control over your actions and I don't want to, but I'm happy to share why I feel the way I feel and why I do the things I do. And that served me well in this community. I mean, that's kind of been my practice throughout the last, 15 years of my life, both professionally and in the hobbies that I've been into. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I think because there's more people like myself, being more public, with the podcast and Instagram. And now I don't typically, I don't make a habit of sharing my like opinions on anything outside of the reptile, community. Except when there's something that is like glaring. I think that it could be that it feels like it's a little bit overwhelming for me, because people like me are sort of like speaking up, or like speaking out against certain things, that is causing people to be a little bit more like aggressive or a little bit louder, which I think might be the case, which makes me uncomfortable. And I'm trying to like combat that. I'm trying to figure out how to like push through that.
Right. And it's one of those, and it's not just in the reptile community. I can tell you that much. It's in, like, I was heavily involved in the swing dance world for a very long time, and it was the same there too. And I think we go to these places to get a reprieve from the politics of life. Let's just call it that. But when something pops up, someone says something, and it's very clearly not okay and very clearly negatively affecting the community, specifically targeting minority groups, it's you kind of have to make that choice of, okay, do I need to step out of my comfort zone and speak up and be like, hey, no, that's not what this community is about. Let's call this out, do some actionable changes in how we're going to move forward from here, so we can go back to focusing on what we all really love, which is the animals. But I think if we push it to the side and ignore it because it's uncomfortable, it doesn't make it better. It just makes it okay when it's not, right? So that's my biggest thing of seeing someone's behavior that I don't have any control over. But I can call that out and be like, hey, I noticed this and I know that it's not okay. And this is what I'm going to change moving forward, and what I need these people to change moving forward. Or I can't really, like, I don't want to use your name. I don't want to socialize with you. Like, I don't want to focus on you at all. I want to focus on these actionable, positive changes to make the community inviting for everyone.
Right. And I think that goes a long way to the advent of inclusion of social media into this hobby as well, because if somebody does something or says something that is incorrect or out of line, in terms of people of color or what have you, there is now a huge voice that says, we're just going to not pay attention to you anymore if you continue your behavior. And it's a great thing to have a self-policing network like that. In some cases, when it comes to husbandry and care, that self-policing network is not always the best thing. But typically the collective group of the reptile industry really does start pointing out these social injustices, and when people aren't doing the right thing for other people, it's really one of those situations that has changed drastically. I admin several groups on Facebook, and part of the group's motto is, everybody can ask any question they want without being yelled at, without being bashed, without being screamed at, and we boot immediately. We're done. We're not playing these games anymore. I don't care if a person asks how big their baby corn snake they just bought needs to eat. I don't care. I'll answer that question 10,000 times. Our groups have 15 or 16,000 members, depending on the species aligned with it. And we do everything in our power as an admin team to make sure that everybody in those groups has a free and open, sharing, caring, asking, learning, and understanding, no matter your age level, group, everything, everything. They're more than, we have several different groups that are species specific, and then one that's kind of all encompassing, which we only just started. But it is a great place to share. And, people get pissed off. Well, she's not doing the right thing for her animal. Well, we understand that, but there's a better way than calling her a fucking idiot, that you can deal with this problem and make it so that the animal is healthy, regardless of the fact. It's your behavior that needs to change while you're trying to educate somebody else, period.
Yeah. And I think that same approach, which is such a healthy one, is the same for if we see someone kind of stuck in an old school way of referring to other groups of people.
Yeah.
that is not okay.
Right.
And being like, hey, like I can be upset about it. That's my own thing to deal with, but I'm going to share why I'm upset about it
Mhm.
and share how I'm going to move forward, not just scream at this one person.
Right.
Because that does nothing. And it's
Right.
also not going to change, more than likely, it's not going to do anything to help change the way that they think or behave.
Right.
Right?
As a point, in fact, a negative action on your part is going to force them down that rabbit hole even further.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's the same thing of like, hey, we have a different set of morals or ethics. Everyone does.
Mhm.
All of us do as individual humans. So approaching it in a way that is sharing, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I do. It's one way to do this thing. There are so many different ways to do this thing well. Right. So anyone else with other options, like, hey,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
it's that collaboration style of constructive feedback
Yeah.
versus you're a horrible keeper because you're not doing it right. You're a horrible person because of
Right.
XYZ. It's like,
Right.
okay. I mean, if you go back to like the really big YouTubers pages, go back, when they first started, it's like,
Yep.
they don't do that anymore because
Yep.
that's not how it's done anymore. And they acknowledge that and have made changes. But am I going to support or follow this person because 10 years ago they were doing what everyone else was doing?
What they thought was correct. What
Right.
science was telling them was correct at the time.
Right. Yeah. I'm like, no, that's like people grow and change, and we need to be opening and accepting of that growth and change.
Right.
throughout
And
time.
industries grow and change as well, separately
Right.
from individuals. And that in itself is something that needs to be pushed to the forefront of understanding. 20 years ago, we didn't have 1,000 companies making 4x2x2 enclosures. We basically put animals in what they made, which was primarily aquariums at the time,
Mhm.
or home built. But
Yeah.
that in and of itself changed the entire industry when there was this mass production of enclosures that actually fit the needs of the animal versus purposing something that was designed for something else to keep something in.
Right.
And I just think that people aren't paying attention to the larger picture of at the end of the day, it's an animal. It's a life. It's a living, breathing being.
Mhm.
In order to correct the husbandry or help the person who's having a hard time, if you yell at them, they turn off, they're done. They don't want to listen to you. They don't care what you have to say, and that's the end of it. But if you
Right.
are open and accepting and understand their reasonings, and you have this conversation, and you're not going to change everybody's opinion anyway, because
Right.
people are inherently stubborn, but you will at least make them think outside of the box for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then they may Google it. They may research it on YouTube. They may see 20 other people who they really know and trust saying the same thing, and maybe their behavior will then change at that point.
Yeah.
But we don't generally come across, in our groups on Facebook, we don't generally come across a lot of people who are like killing their animal with their husbandry. Most of it is like, oh, well, he likes to hide a lot. Well, you need to put some more clutter in there. Or, he
Right.
doesn't want to come out at night. Well, you shouldn't probably have a red bulb on him. They're not good for snakes. There's enough research at this point to prove that. But
Yeah, but it's like companies are still like, you go to PetSmart, you can get a heat
they're
rock,
there. Right.
no problem. And if
Right.
you don't know, if you haven't talked to someone, or I mean, even say if you haven't done your research, but even then, like,
Yeah.
even the research, if you Google how to like heat my reptile, heat rocks will pop up, and it's like
On the first page of Google, after
right.
20 years of them being bad.
Yep. And
Like-
it's not that the person is intentionally practicing bad husbandry. It's just that the bad equipment is still highly accessible. So it's just like, oh yeah, I remember this is a thing that is what people use, so I'm going to use it too.
Right.
So it's not like, it's not that they are bad keepers. It's just they were given bad information.
Right. And I think that goes a long way to speaking of the hopeful inclusiveness of this industry.
Mhm.
We're all reptile keepers. It doesn't matter what we are, where we are in life. We all have that same passion and that same love. Even if we have one ball python or 20 king snakes, it doesn't matter how many you have. You still have that same oh my God, look what it did today. It was incredible. Oh my God, it
Right.
was amazing. It was climbing on this log. It was doing this. It was doing that. Oh my goodness, it almost bit me. All these things that we have in common beyond anything else are
Mhm.
way more important than any subjected bigotry or backwards thinking possibilities that one should share in a hobby like this.
Yeah. And oh, go ahead, Greg. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say, I think that, having conversations like this is important.
Mhm.
Obviously it's important, because, and I guess I say this like with like some humility, but I learned at some point over the last, you know, 10 years that, as far as, um, people being like blatantly racist or just like ignorant in general and saying things that are racist, you know, there's no such thing as not racist. You're either racist or you're anti-racist. And for years, I was like, I'm not racist. I'm not racist until I learned that. And I learned that like educating people is part of being anti-racist.
Yeah. Having the conversation
You know?
is the important part.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of, I think that conversation is really difficult for a lot of, it was difficult for me when I first started having it, because you really have to, as a white presenting individual, you have to place blame on yourself in order to grow and be like, oh, like, even if it's not intentionally, I am still contributing to this racist agenda because I'm not making actionable changes in myself to help shift the dialogue, right? And to kind of play devil's advocate about what you said earlier, Brian, about like, we don't care who you are coming into the reptile hobby. We all have this same love and passion for animals, which is great. It's amazing. But I think sometimes that mindset of like, oh, it doesn't matter what your background is, we all have this one thing in common, it can have a negative side effect unintentionally, because it becomes a little easier to excuse racist or homophobic or
Right.
sexist behavior, because it's like, oh, well, that doesn't have anything to do with the reptile community,
Right.
so we can just ignore it, right? So instead,
well, I mean,
like,
it's prevalent in all society. I understand
right.
that completely. Right.
Yeah. And I think, and my point, like kind of the whole devil's advocate part of that, is acknowledging people as their entire selves. Like, okay, you're a trans person of color. Awesome. Right. I see that, and I love that is who you are.
Absolutely.
Part of, and a part of that is also that you love reptiles. That's cool. I think that's a more holistic way of being inclusive in any hobby versus
when I was saying inclusive, that
okay.
was
Yeah.
When I was saying inclusive, that was my dominant thought process.
Yeah.
Was not objectifying just their reptile keeping, but making sure that person was welcomed regardless of the person in general.
Right.
I have a writer that writes all of my posts for me. If I write, I sound like a 4-year-old. So I not all of my posts, a lot of the quick couple sentences, that's me, but the more in-depth things that are researched, yeah, I have ADHD. I can't do that. I can, it's all there. All the information is there, but it cannot come out of my mouth and typed the same way that my volunteer can do it. But when I speak about inclusive, I do mean acknowledging any part of a person that makes a person a person. Their own personalities, obviously, their own sexual orientations, their own colors, their own people, their culture, everything. I want it all to be known. I want every part of that to be, who they are in this hobby. I don't want somebody who might be from a culture that has never been in the United States hobby yet saying, oh, well, I can't talk about that because I'm not like the social norm. That's unacceptable. That's not That's not the way any hobby or any industry should be allowed to be run. It should be welcoming on all levels.
Yeah, I agree.
I wasn't trying to talk over you. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
I
you're
just wanted to
fine.
be very clear
Fine.
that my ability to speak is that of a Neanderthal. So
Yeah, no, you're good. And I think it's helpful to clarify things and also to challenge our own perception and our own language use too.
oh, absolutely.
Are these words inclusive? Are these words unintentionally sidelining a piece of someone?
Right.
Unintentionally, right?
Right.
So I think it's just, that's one of those things that's like kind of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and being like, oh yeah, and being okay with being corrected.
Yep, absolutely.
Be like, oh yeah, you know what, you're right. I did not word that right. This wasn't a great decision. And I think that is where some of the people who are unwilling to acknowledge that change is happening and needs to happen.
Yep.
I think they're going to find themselves very isolated, potentially with like-minded people. So maybe they'll be perfectly happy. But I don't think they're going to have as much success as they could.
Right.
Absolutely. As any of us could if we were like, oh, let's take a step back and see, like, let me challenge myself and see how I can do this better.
1,000%.
Yeah, like I love the idea of being able to go somewhere and not being like sort of on guard. Like I'm the type of person where like I'm always kind of on guard around people that I don't know, and that the thought of not feeling that way is like, for me, that's something to like inspire or to aspire to, is to walk into an expo, or go to like go to like a reptile zoo and not even think about it and just enjoy what's going on, and that, for me, like that's,
oh man,
that's what I want. That's, words are putting words together. Unlike Brian, I can type them. I am good at typing words and sounding very professional and great, but when it comes to like speaking them out loud, I'm like an infant. I'm like, it's terrible.
Yeah, but I mean, I can empathize with that situation of walking into a room and feeling like you do not belong and trying to feel comfortable in a space where you feel that way is tough. But also figuring out what needs to be done to change that can be even more challenging, because sometimes it's like, I never want to put it on somebody else to make me feel comfortable. But I also think it's important to, if you say something and it negatively impacts someone else, whether it's intentionally or not, if you get feedback from that, someone being like, FYI, like that didn't really sit well with me, it made me uncomfortable because of this, and being receptive to that feedback and making changes, because it's not necessarily your fault that you made someone feel that way. But if you are given that information that this made someone or a group of someone's,
you at least have to take responsibility for it.
Right. You should. I think it's kind of, it's a cop out if your response is, oh, I'm sorry it made you feel that way, because it places all of that responsibility on the person that your actions made feel a negative way. So that's where I get irritated with that kind of response, because I'm like, just own up, just own up. That's all we need. You need to own up and, listen to what people have to say. And at that point, you get to decide how you want to respond to it. But, hopefully it's in a way that positively impacts yourself and others, versus this is just the way I am, so take it or leave it.
Right.
Abby, you definitely sound like somebody who's educated in how to talk about this stuff.
I've been incredibly privileged in getting to experience being a minority in Title I classrooms in Baltimore and all of that stuff, and acknowledging the fact that if I am the one white person, the one white presenting person in a Black classroom or a Hispanic classroom or any other BIPOC classroom, acknowledging the power that I still hold because I am white presenting. Right? Like that is a big eye opener. Because like I want everyone to be on equal footing, right? But it's not.
Right.
It's not. And acknowledging that was the biggest perception shift for me. And also just that idea of like, okay, well, I know what I know, which is a very little bit of the knowledge that is out there. I know what I don't know, which is a little bit of a bigger chunk. And then all of the stuff that I don't even know, I don't know.
Right.
Right. So kind of that idea of, oh my gosh, this is my impact on groups of people just simply by showing up as a white individual. It's a huge, that was a huge, like, oh my gosh, here is all of this stuff that I now know that I don't know. Like it's a lot of cognitive dissonance to sift through.
Yep.
And it takes time. I get why people don't always want to speak up because there is that fear of saying the wrong thing. And again, you just speak up, but be okay with the feedback if you do say the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you're right. This is a much better way to word this.
Yep.
There's always going to be a better way to word or take action on something. And that's okay.
Yep.
It doesn't mean you shouldn't make the effort towards those changes yourself.
Right. You should always strive to be better.
Right.
Regardless.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I also think that that's like a perfect thought process or mindset in all areas of life.
Mm-hmm.
Like raising a child, or caring for snakes,
right?
Like having that ability to know all the things that you don't know, and it keeps your mind open to like expanding the care of
Mm-hmm.
your animals. I recently was talking to Brian last week, maybe earlier this week, about the like what I want to do for my at least my two like pythons, like
The
as
bigger
far as
species you have.
care wise and bigger spaces, and and I live in a condo. It's a 2-bedroom condo. This is their room. But like I want like half of this room that I'm in to be for one of those snakes. And it happens to be the smallest of them, the children's python.
Oh, the children's python. You were telling me about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So because I'm like, as time goes on, I'm learning, about their behavior and the way that they act. And I'm like, a 4x2 enclosure for a children's python, like a pet children's python, is too small. I mean, it's a small snake, but it's in my view, it's too small. Now,
the way that animal interacts with its environment shows you that is a small environment for it. It would utilize every inch of that half room given to it. Yep.
It would.
I wanted to say one thing before we got too far away from what we were talking about with being able to adapt and change in your persona publicly. I used to, when I do educational lectures and demonstrations with reptiles. I do it constantly. It's it's one of the ways that the rescue actually creates income for the rescue itself.
Oh, yes, that's awesome.
And I can remember 15 years ago, 17 years ago, my lectures would all start in public libraries, what have you, as ladies and gentlemen. And as we slowly approached the 2000, I'd have to really say it was like 12 or 13. It's good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's not the same. It was a conscious decision to make based on accepting everyone in the crowd, regardless. And, I can remember, and I'm not going to name names, but there was other educators that I was around who were like, why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do is why I do that. And, I'm a 6 foot tall man, and I'm not very I'm very intimidating looking. I'm like a giant teddy bear, but I am very big. And when I say something, most people don't question it after the fact, but this person was just like, well, I don't understand why. Well, because it's the important part of changing as a society to accept everybody. If you can't accept everybody in your society, then why be public at all? Just go be in your home and say whatever you want to yourself, because it has no business in public.
Yeah. But then isn't that fun though? Like when it clicks and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a thing I didn't know about.
Yeah.
This is the
there's
thing
a lot of
before. Like it's
acknowledging what I don't know is incredible. And not knowing something and then learning that I didn't know something is even more incredible. I mean, I'm less people oriented, more animal oriented. So for animal stuff, it's way more like eye-opening. Holy crap, I didn't know that. That's an amazing fact. But with people, it's more of a accepting professionalism, the core of humanity situation, where it's not as overpowering to me as an animal fact, but it's still very important because I am a human, as well as everyone else is a human. And that's the playing field. If you don't like that, I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell everybody else, but you're a human, they're a human. Help them do things.
I mean, I think leading by example here is really essential for things like that. And like for me, when I find something out that's like new or different from what I've been doing, I get so excited about it. Or if I'm like, I don't know how to do this thing, I'm a little bit afraid to start exploring it because I don't know what I'm doing. But shifting that fear into being curious about it and like exploring it and being okay with not being really good at it is great. Instead of just, I think that's where a lot of people push back because they see any sort of criticism as negative. But it's it can be so much fun because it's a chance to learn and to grow and develop. And that's what life is all about. Like, I don't care what you're into. That's what it's all about. And kind of leading by that example, I think is really important. So if anyone gives me feedback on something, I'm like, yes, please, like, tell me how else this can be done. And I will analyze that information. And if I think it will work well, like I didn't have my snakes on UVB when I first got them. Like I didn't even know UVB was a thing. Like I knew it was for lizards, but I didn't know what it was for snakes. And then went to Retic Fest in July, and Ryan McVeigh did a talk on it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is one of those things I didn't know I didn't know. And now I know I don't know it. And now I want to go like explore it and see what I can do with it. Like he didn't point a finger and be like, if you're not keeping with UVB, you're doing it wrong. And I don't do that.
And that's how all information should be shared in a positive, uplifting way. When we do any kind of posts, or our newsletter has several articles about, things that happened or have been changing, or any kind of paradigm shift in the industry, or even just cool facts about a specific group of animals that the general public may not know, it's such an awesome rabbit hole to be able to teach people positively. I don't want to tell anybody they're doing something wrong. First of all, I don't want to hurt their feelings and kick them out of the hobby. That's the majority of it. The second thing is if you have a positive interaction with another person in the hobby, that then becomes a social hobby. And in a social construct, it then becomes more and something that's even more of a driving force. You want to get 100 people to sign up for US Ark. You don't yell at them and tell them they're keeping their ball pythons wrong. You casually talk to them and try to change their behaviors and try to bring them under your wing and teach them how to do it correctly. You know, I've been in conversations with people who have fed their turtles cheese and like all of these crazy things that happen. And I have learned tact. Like, I think the majority of people in this industry could never even possibly understand. Because they're the people who are shutting that question down, or they saw it on Facebook and they didn't bother answering because they wanted to be nice. Whereas I don't have a choice. I run a rescue. I've done this for 20 years. I have to answer that question because I'm that entity that I have created in my home area. Even all across social media at this point, because I get Instagram messages and Facebook messages with some very strange things. They all reptile related. And it's really hard for me sometimes to just be like, is there a dairy in the water? Like, do you think that's a positive thing for your turtle? Just wondering.
Yeah.
But being able to tactfully explain something like that and how it's wrong and what creates, why that's such a very bad practice for that animal, you generally change their mind, and they don't want to hurt their animal.
Right.
You bring it up in such a way, and you're not like, you're a fucking idiot, you don't know how to take care of your animal. Instead, you say something like, is there any other natural food sources that you could perhaps purchase locally that might be a little better? Hey, you know what? Here's a quick list. Go to the grocery store and try and find this, or go to the reptile store and try and find that, or what have you. It's just a matter of being able to really streamline your ability to convey something without being negatively critical.
Right.
And it's something that I feel I dealt with a lot when I was first entering the hobby, because 25 years ago, it was like a free-for-all, and it was like, you're not doing it right. Well, guess what? 20 years later, you weren't either. So it doesn't even matter at this point.
Right.
But
and it's creating a space that's, you're in approaching those questions that way, you're creating a space that's inviting for other, like, if someone's not sure, like, it gets people to check themselves and be like, I'm not sure. I'm going to go post this on this Facebook page and ask, because I know I'm not going to be attacked if it isn't being done correctly. Like, I've done that with, when I was first starting to keep my Colombian rainbow boa. I'm like, I posted a picture of her body condition, because I'm like, is she looking a little skinny? Do I need to up her feeding? Like, I need some feedback. I need some help on this. And everyone was super, super kind. Like, it wasn't it's not a free for all. Like, I think a lot of Facebook groups have been not successful because they literally just used it as an ego trip of like, I'm going to make this Facebook group page so I can tell everyone else how they're doing it wrong and why they shouldn't be keeping animals. It's like, no.
What we find that there is this like natural, healthy, if you're posting from onto somebody else's post from your own personal experience, and you're doing it in an educational, positive, non-negative way, there's some amazing conversations that happen. And I would have killed for that information 20 years ago in just starting to keep a corn snake, for example. And I think, like, what's a good variety of diet for a corn snake? 20 years ago, just feed it rats, just feed it mice. Now, you can feed them quail. Some of them will eat eggs. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing to see other keepers who may be just a couple notches above skill level wise answering questions to people who are, new. They just bought their animal from Petco or PetSmart, and you don't get that same like, oh, well, all pet stores are evil. But, you get this like, maybe PetSmart might not be the best place to buy a reptile, but now that you have it, let's talk about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's a whole different way of existing. And I have been a part of a lot of groups throughout Facebook's life, and I can say that some of them do really, really, really well. And they're not an ego trip. They're not that same situation where the person who started it wants to be famous or what have you. It's they wanted to create a safe place because they themselves were bashed, or they themselves were told they were wrong, or being mean to, or told to fuck off, whatever it is. There's this situation where, in the groups nowadays that are starting, there's a lot of this. No bullying is the first rule, and it's a great shift. It really is, because I worked for a humane law agency for a long time, and I wasn't the humane law agent, but I went on to a lot of those situations as a big guy, catching dogs, doing what we had to do. You'd be so surprised how many people you go to cite for their dog being left outside or skinny or what have you. They just don't know. They have no idea. And for me, that was like mind blowing. Completely, like, how do you look at your pet and not know that dog needs to eat like 10 times the amount of food it's been eating in a month? For me, it was just completely, people don't know, Brian. You have to teach them. And from that job, from that perspective, is how I've walked into the rest of my career as a reptile person, trying to be that positive force for change and good and what have you, and not be that negative. Nope, you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't be feeding your turtle cheese. I mean, come on. I see posts like that all the time. Sometimes people post on our stuff that, oh, you're wrong. Well, that's great. Your opinion's great. Thank you. Appreciate it. People don't understand how to react when you're like, nice.
Yeah. They're looking for that pushback and that drama.
They want
when
that
it
argument.
Doesn't exist, it's like, I don't know what to do.
They don't even bother responding again.
Yeah. Or if you're okay with being wrong, right? Like if someone says, hey, that's not the right way. Oh, okay, cool. Right. Thanks for the information. I will make some changes.
Right.
Yeah, kind of whenever it's like a troll culture kind of response, kind of responding in a very positive way that doesn't push back is, I've found personally, it just dissipates. That thought force drama very, very quickly.
Look at that.
I've had in my lap.
Did he shed?
No, he hasn't shed yet. He was in his sky hide, and I took him out to just kind of check on him, because he doesn't like to stay hydrated when he's in shed, because he's a retic. They like to do that. But something about him is I can pull him out. He's just been sitting in his hide this entire time, and like offer him a little bowl of water, and he'll like get all hydrated, drink out of the bowl, and hold him. It's so funny. Like, hilarious. All right, let me put him back.
Yep, no problem.
2 ticks.
I'll take a second myself.
Two hours later.
Talk to you about US Ark and
yes.
I don't, this just says US Ark, so I'm going to say a bunch of things because I don't really know exactly what Greg wants me to talk about. Are you a member? Do you perpetuate membership? Are you trying to help people become US Ark members? What's the deal with you and US Ark, I guess, is the best way to say it.
Yeah,
or did I say it US Ark, or I don't know. I've heard it said 1,000 times differently. So
yeah, I've heard it say both ways. I say US Ark, but US Ark works fine, like however you want to say it. Yeah, so I got my first snake in September of 21. By that January, I delved deep enough into the reptile community to know what US Ark is, what it does for us. I mean, at that point, the Lacey Act had been discovered, so that was very loud in the reptile community, which is great. So immediately became a bronze member, and then a month later upped it to silver, just because I don't expect anyone to do that.
Right.
I was able to, so I did. So yeah, like very, very shortly after getting my first reptile, I became a US Ark member. I have worked with nonprofits for most of my career, so I know there's a lot of people who just don't know what US Ark is. So I think that's where sharing that information, whenever I've gotten better about this recently. not every one of my YouTube videos, but the majority of the long format YouTube videos, I tag US Ark, mention them in a little clip throughout the video and share why they're important. But yeah, I do advocate for membership for them. Like I know Garrett, I'm getting to know Garrett better and better through kind of working here and there at the facility, and get a little bit more of insight of how much work people, the core group of people who are voicing like our voices as privileged reptile keepers to maintain that privilege of keeping these animals. And I think there's some weird misconceptions out there as far as what US Ark is and what they do. And I do try and keep myself, like I work really hard to keep myself open to conversations with people who have different perceptions of what US Ark is.
Okay.
And, potentially don't really like them or believe in what they're doing, and try and have conversations that move forward. I don't necessarily have to change their mind, but at least conversation that will help move the dialect forward, and not, my go-to is never, there's something wrong with you if you're not a US Ark member. Right. I know, because who knows? You could be like every last penny could be going to actually providing care for the animals that you have. Right. And it's times are rough right now.
Yeah.
So I never want to guilt.
That's the understatement.
Right. So my goal is to inform, not guilt trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good goal.
Yeah.
And I have been around long enough to see US Ark go from something that was relatively obscure and not known about to something that is in the forefront of just about any serious reptile keeper's mind. If you were to talk to somebody who had one ball python and you wanted them to sign up for US Ark, how would you do? What would you say?
I would let them know, like, hey, what do you know about keeping the animal, and like the rights that it takes for you to keep that animal, and kind of delve into, did you know there is actually a organization that allows us to continue keeping these animals? So if you're really loving keeping that ball python and you want other people to also experience this, go check out US Ark. They make the membership so accessible too.
Yep, absolutely.
So, you can do the sustaining membership for $5 a month. You can do the, $30 bronze. I think they have like a 20. I think they recently changed the pricing structure. It might be.
I honestly haven't checked in a while.
Yeah, I only noticed because my membership is coming due in a couple weeks. But yeah, like they get creative in how you're able to become a member. I don't even think you have to be a member in order to sign up for the newsletters that they send out.
Right.
And those are super essential, because you have things pop up like, what is the animal education bans that are coming up left, right, and center across. I feel like every state is getting hit with these animal education bans.
Yep.
Like, y'all.
There's one, as far as I know, there's one in Long Island right now that's being presented.
There? Yep. There's one in Washington State. There's one in New Mexico.
Connecticut.
Yep.
Connecticut. Yep.
Yeah, Connecticut. There was one. Where was it? In like North Dakota or some rant, like they just keep on it, and it's the exact same thing. It's just making its way across states. And I think it's literally just animal rights groups being like, well, this
copy
state,
and pasting and sending it to legislators.
Maybe this state won't notice it, So yeah, and without US Ark keeping a radar out for those kinds of things,
right? It would slip on. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
It would slip right through and get signed into law, and that'd be at the end of it. And fighting that law once it happens is going to be a miserable battle. Trust me, everybody listening to this podcast, I'm from New York. Trust me, fighting laws is a miserable battle.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add on to that, and this is something that Jeremy does a really good job at Brassman Reptiles. He does a really good job of clarifying this, is if it's an exotic animal restriction or ban that doesn't include reptiles, there's a reason US Ark still flags it and fights against it, because if that gets passed into law, making changes on the back end is so easy. And all of a sudden that ban that had nothing to do with you as a reptile keeper is all of a sudden affecting you in a very big way.
Yep.
So
that's in Connecticut.
Yep.
That's exactly what they did in Connecticut, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
the chimpanzee attacked the person, and this legislation came through, and then months later they signed a whole amendment to it and banned a bunch of different species of reptile.
Yep. Yeah, the amendments are what'll kick us in the ass
if we're not paying attention. Yep.
Not paying attention. I don't have time to go through all of those alerts every single day. They through all of those emails, and getting an alert in a newsletter is so much more effective for me and it's a better use of my time, to be honest. It's a way better use of my time. So then I can focus on, okay, this is a ban that comes up. These are the people I'm going to contact. They have an email already written out for you. I can make some changes if I want to. I can send it in and let my voice be heard. And then I can go back to focusing on what I really want to be doing, what I feel I can do best as a positive impact on the general public, is sharing my animals, how I keep my animals, sharing how I interact with my snakes specifically, because there's such a negative perception about snakes.
Yep.
And hopefully change at least one person's mind. And I know that that's happened because I've had people on Instagram and YouTube message me and be like, oh my gosh, I'm curious about this now. I was always afraid of snakes, and now I'm actually like, this one's actually kind of cute. What is happening? I'm like, haha, my evil plan is working.
Yep.
Right? Like US Ark allows me to focus on that, which is so important.
Yeah, immensely important.
Yeah.
The message that reptiles aren't mean, nasty monsters that are out to attack you in your sleep is a message that's touted by 90% of keepers, that you're educating whether you know it or not. Just by posting a picture of you holding that reptile, you're still educating the general public. As long as you're doing it politely, not negative in any way, and you're not a fearmonger, it works out perfectly. The more people that keep them, the better off reptiles will be in society. Maybe not in the wild, but that's a whole different conversation.
Oh yeah, but again, like, sharing these animals and developing an awareness of them helps develop an awareness of where they come from. What is their environment like? Because you do get pushback, I think all of us have, on like, oh my gosh, that's a wild animal. What the heck are you thinking?
Yep.
And that is a teachable moment right there. Like, oh, you know what? Like, all of these animals that I keep are captive bred.
Yep.
And the more we captive breed these amazing animals, the more we make it safe for their wild counterpart and can focus on environmental protection for the existing species that are in the wild.
Right.
That is such an important teachable moment. And I think that's, again, important, instead of if someone comes at it from like someone from PETA who's brainwashed and like, oh, keeping animals in an enclosure of any kind is just horrible. Using that as a teachable moment instead of just getting frustrated. It's like, okay, I probably will not change your mind, but I can at least plant a seed that, who knows, eventually down the road, maybe that will grow into something more. If I shut you down by just saying you're an idiot, I'm going to go 0 places and reinforce the fact that the reptile community is bad.
Right. And I think a lot of that chest pounding, triumphant shouting at people who are trying to post their agenda and get our animals out of our care is becoming almost secondary to people having legit conversations about it.
Yeah.
10 years ago, when all this legislation really started coming down, people were getting furious, and the eruptions on social media, the eruptions via video on YouTube were outlandishly crazy. Like, hold on a minute, you're trying to argue a point with a United States lawmaker. You can't scream in their face. Like, that's not how things work.
Yeah.
You have to have, and that's, again, and I don't mean to bring it back to our last conversation, but that's where USARK comes into play, because you can tout and be as loud as you want, but the face of the reptile hobby is a professional entity that is going to bat for us to be able to continue to keep the animals we have.
Yep. And I will never be able to speak on a lawmaking agenda as well as
right.
the people from US Ark are able to speak on it, because they're speaking legalese. I don't
absolutely
need you to help me decipher what it actually means. So I can speak well on certain topics, but being honest with yourself about what you're able to speak well on is really important too. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons, like, feeding videos don't bother me. Live feeding videos bother me. Because I don't think that's a practice that should be done unless, like, I get it, it's sometimes necessary for the livelihood of an animal who refuses to eat frozen thawed and just won't do it. And that's part of the husbandry aspect of keeping an animal like a snake. And I understand that. And again, being honest with yourself, like, okay, if I want to breed these animals at some point, am I okay if I need to start a baby on live food? Am I okay? Like, these animals are trusting, like, I'm being entrusted with their care here. I need to be willing, I need to be honest and know all of the potential things that I might need to do. Don't want to do it. I mean, even frozen thawed is, I love animals. All of us do. I always say a little, like, thank you for your sacrifice for, like, keeping my little animals healthy, happy. But the people who are yelling about that, I'm like, do you know where a steak come from? Like, do you know what you're feeding your dog? Because your dog eats meat too. It's just processed into this very convenient kibble form, so you don't see it.
Yeah, it had a face at some point, though.
Right. Yeah, and you're disconnected from that circle of life. So I think a lot of reptile keepers, and the reason I love this community, at least part of it, is the groundedness of it, because you really do have to be grounded and acknowledge the full circle of nature to keep these animals well. But yeah, I personally do not have an issue when someone posts a feeding video of a frozen thawed animal. I understand why it's important to present these animals in a way that is digestible for the general public.
Right.
So I do post feeding videos, but it's literally, you don't see the feeder, you just see the animal's movements. Like, I like to share, like, this is an animal in food mode. Like, this is my rainbow boa in food mode. My retic in food mode. They are two very different behaviors.
Right.
Just as a behavioral focus. But I think I've only ever posted one of my retic actually eating his food, because he was eating upside down, and I thought the mechanics of it were just like, whoa, this is super cool.
I have taken a lot of video of many animals eating.
Yeah.
I keep it for myself. I show it to close friends. I don't generally post things like that. I think maybe there's 10 or 20 in the of pictures, not even video, of reptiles feeding on our page. I just don't. It's not about me publicizing something negative, because I don't think feeding your reptile is negative, period.
Yeah, I don't think it is either.
But at the same point in time, the general public, which my page has a lot of non-reptile specific people because of rescue in general on it, they don't necessarily think the same way. And their news feed could have been the fluffy bunny 5 seconds ago that's looking for a home on Pet Finder or whatever, and then here comes an anaconda eating a fluffy bunny. It's not that's the way I've always thought about it for my personal content production. But animals sometimes don't eat frozen thawed. It's a fact of life. Do I choose to do it on purpose? No, absolutely not. But will I feed alive if I have to? Yes, absolutely, 100%. The animal's life is way more important to me than any kind of moral conundrum that might be inside me to do that. My ethics are, this is a prey item, this is a predator. The predator deserves to live just as much as the prey item does. And in this case, my public entity is designed to keep these top predators alive and potentially find homes, so on and so forth. And that's really how I justify it to myself.
Yeah. And being honest with yourself is, again, like, so important here. And I think that's where I get torn between like there's a lot of pushback on like never post feeding videos, never post feeding
Right.
videos. Okay. If we're trying to educate, part of our work as reptiles is to educate what keeping these animals is like. Part of that is feeding them, which should be obvious. But again, if you don't know what you don't know, then maybe you don't know that.
Right.
But a lot of people actually don't realize frozen thawed is even a thing. And that completely changes, like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to own a snake and I just wouldn't because of what it gets fed. But if it's frozen thawed, that makes it so much easier.
Right.
So it can actually be a welcoming invitation to someone who wouldn't have otherwise been interested in keeping. So that's where I get torn, because it's like, I'm a very realistic person.
Yep.
I'm like, a part of the reality of keeping these animals is that they eat, and this is their diet.
Yeah. Taking things at face value and then diving a little deeper after the fact is a par for the course in my life as well. I mean, at the end of the day, when you deal with 40 or 50 animals at a time, you have to be grounded. You can't be fanatical and crazy. You have, like, this snake needs to eat. If it doesn't eat in 2 weeks, it's going to get alive. That's it. End of story. If it doesn't eat the live, I'm not going to leave it in there overnight. I'm not going to subject the snake to harm or possible, being consumed by the food source. I would never do something like that. It's going to be as safe as humanly possible. But at the end of the day, you have to do what's right by that snake as well. In the chosen entity. What's up?
I was gonna say, it's also important when it comes to this is to point out companies like Reptilinks, who have come up with a sausage. To feed. So there's something that is I think for a lot of people it would be easier to stomach the idea of feeding a snake or a lizard like a sausage than it would be like a frozen thawed quail or rat, because those things are in the sausage, but it's a sausage. You know, people eat sausages. So
you're removing the face, basically. It's from what I understand about Reptilinks, they contain just about everything a whole prey item does. It's just ground into a sausage versus being a live animal at some point. I mean, it was a live animal at some point, but but it's processed at that point, which then eliminates the predator prey idea from your mindset. It's now just like you're feeding that bowl of kibble to your dog.
Yeah, and that's a great option for people who just really can't stomach the idea of feeding a whole prey item. I think it's important for everyone to acknowledge where their food comes from. Like, and what it takes to get that animal. Because if you're not willing to, like, I used to live on a farm. We used to raise sheep for meat, and we used to feed the lambs and let them grow up. And, it was always with the expectation of, this is an animal that it will eventually be feeding us. We are feeding it. It will eventually be feeding us, and giving that animal the best life possible until that time comes. And again, because of how easy it is to hunt and gather for humans now, because you just go to the grocery store, it's that disconnect of us from nature. And I think it's one of the things I love about keeping these animals. It really does bring you back to that connection. And I always wonder because people are always kind of like, oh, people post feedings for views and likes and all of that stuff, because it's a little bit more on the forbidden end of like, oh, you're not supposed to post that. When someone does, it's a lot of attention and a lot of like almost sensationalism around it, even though it's not that sensational. And I always wonder, like, if a bunch of people posted a bunch of feeding videos, would it be that sensationalized anymore? Or would it just become this is the thing that reptiles eat. This is just part of keeping an animal. This is the sociology part of me. I have a degree in sociology. This is just the
principle could be, if you want to examine that principle, let's take the quintessential Western diamondback rattlesnake. And let's take the standing posture in the figure 8, the raised head, open mouth, fangs dripping, tail going. That was the pictures. 15 years ago on social media, 10 years ago on social media.
Right.
There has been a paradigm shift in that now. This shift has become these flattened out, calm, interactive animals that you no longer have this ultimate threat display of the rattlesnake being aggressive. You have a calm, placid animal just sitting on a rock, right? And in that understanding with publication, you have also changed people's perception, and a lot more people are now willing to get a snake simply because they're not being villainized in any way.
Right.
That right there goes 100% into what you're talking about when you're talking about if 1,000 people just started posting live, not live feeding, but videos of frozen thawed feeding. Let me be very clear. I think if those 1,000 people did that and they did it weekly with, let's say they have 10 or 12 animals, I feel like that in and of itself would change the perceptions of society again. Mm-hmm. And we would push to that understanding that this is a wild animal. This is an animal that consumes another animal. End of the story. It's natural. It's normal. It's nature. It's what it is. I see a lot of videos being produced on Instagram and specifically Instagram, mostly with carnivores, large African carnivores taking down large prey items.
Right. Yep.
Right. For me, that will be something I see in person before I die, just so we're clear. Hopefully it's not me, just so we're clear. But two,
we know if Brian ever goes viral.
But two, I feel like that's a glimpse into nature, and everything that I have produced content-wise has followed that suit. When it comes to publication for social media, I'm not these people that are trying to sensationalize something. I'm the David Attenborough educator side, where I just want to bring you into the world that I inhabit so you can see something really awesome. And I never really thought about it in a changing society way. And I may start posting some videos because I feed a lot of animals, a lot.
Yeah, and it's like teenage drinking, right? Why do they want to go drink so bad? Because they can't. Right? Like they don't have that problem in France.
Right. And if you give them the ability to do so, it doesn't become a problem.
Right. Yeah. Here's a safe space to do this thing that you are now given the ability to do.
My best friend's mom did that for me, just so we're clear.
Oh, that's awesome. It's just, again, it's like the whole drama thing. Yep. If you don't give anything to push the drama back against, it becomes undramatic.
Right.
And that may not work out well for people who are trying to sensationalize,
right?
But it shouldn't be anyway. So I think I'm not gonna feel bad about it.
No, I'm genuinely, I was very serious. I do believe that I'm going to start posting maybe at least one frozen thawed feeding a week. I really like the undertone, the societal undertone, possible change that may come along with it, especially with an entity like my own and the people who follow me on certain social medias.
Yeah.
I think it'll be well accepted. I don't know if it'll be well accepted, but I think eventually it would be a cultural exception, a social exception of the general public. It's not going to be 50 people saying, "Oh my God, that's disgusting." Like I do, I don't know if you guys have ever done ads on Facebook or Instagram or anything, but I did a couple when I first started the page, and I did, I just posted a corn snake, and it was a beautiful picture of a buckskin Okatee corn snake that somebody had given the rescue. And this is like the most amazing corn snake you'll ever see in your life. The colors are so vibrant. It was a professional photographer who took the picture, a good friend of mine. And I used that as an ad of, hey, come like the page if you like reptiles, right? That was it. So all it said was who we are real quick. We've been doing this since 2003, so on and so forth. It was very, 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 very quick. I got probably like 200-300 likes, a few hearts and whatever. And I got like 50 comments. Out of those 50 comments, like 10 of them were, ew, never. Well, you went out of your way to post on it. So, I mean, are you sure it's never?
Right. That always cracks me up when that happens.
Sure it's never. Like, most people are afraid of snakes. I get that. Maybe I should have done a lizard, but no. Forget that. I wanted to do a snake. I used a beautiful representation of a snake.
Okeechobes are so pretty.
Yeah, and that's the end of it. You know what I mean? It was like it's one of those situations that, you know, in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great. It's gonna get attention because, you know, I'm paying for an ad, which, by the way, don't ever do that. They're pointless. And I was like, this is amazing. I'm gonna get so much attention from this because this is a beautiful serpent. And when the first couple of comments came in and it was like you, I'm like I didn't get anybody posting like only good snake is a dead snake or anything like that, because that's one of my triggers and I probably would have had a bad day. But like, I mean, the reason that's my trigger is not because that individual thought it was necessary for a snake to pass to die. There are certain circumstances where I understand that a human life is more important than a snake's life, and I get that. If you have a rattlesnake in your backyard, there's tiny children and a dog, and you have no other recourse, I understand it. I'm not against it. If it's absolutely human versus animal, I fully understand. Don't let your 4-year-old be bitten by a rattlesnake. But the problem I have with that systemic way of thinking is, if you know somebody that's killed a snake and they know somebody that's killed a snake and so on and so forth, and that keeps going, how many snakes have died for no bloody reason?
A lot. Rattlesnake roundups.
And that, well, we're not even talking about that. We're talking about just Joe Blow in his backyard. Oh my God, there's a snake. It's a copperhead, because that's 90% of what I'm told all the time. And then it's like a black rat or a milk snake. So
I found a black rat in my backyard in Baltimore once. I got so excited.
Yeah, no, they're awesome. That's my favorite species.
Yeah, they're so cool. I want to own one someday for educational programs.
Super smart.
Yeah, rat snakes are super cool.
But yeah, I mean, it's society. We do something that isn't a norm, and it has become in 20 years more of a norm, which is both a good and a bad thing, but it's still in its infancy. We have not been keeping reptiles in captivity for hundreds of years like mammals. We have no idea what we're really doing yet.
Yeah,
and
what they're capable as pets in captivity. That's what I'm really enjoying about all of my snakes, is they're several generations into captive bred.
Yep.
And one of my plans for breeding my retics is to selectively breed for plasticity and docility. Like, I want to see how far that can take. Because the one that was on my lap for the first hour of this, he will do that when he's not in shed. He comes out on his own all of the time. He's so surprisingly that's the only description I have for him. Is he is social. He has everything he needs in his house.
But he wants to come out.
He wants to come out. And it's not that he wants to come out and run away.
Right. He's not rushing or glass surfing or anything crazy. He's not stressing to come out. He wants to come out.
He wants to come out. He can go anywhere he wants in the room, but he will literally just hang out with me.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's just such a cool, and for me, like, I love snakes, and I think it's my own fault it's my own human fault, right? It's my own human failing that I have these assumptions about snakes that make this kind of behavior just so like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Maybe it's not that cool. Maybe it's just that we haven't opened up our minds to the accessibility of these animals as interactive pets.
Agreed.
Like, I think that's part of it too.
Part of my journey in this podcast has been an eye-opening experience. You know, I talked about this with a lot of the other reptile people that have been on the podcast, but we've done a few, like Lori Tarini, Greg brought up originally in the beginning of the podcast, some of her thoughts on how to interact with your snakes I joke all the time about boas not being friendly with me. And she was like, well, why don't you try and target train it so you can get it in and out of its enclosure and you don't ever have to handle it? I mean, that would be perfect for the snake, because then I don't have to put him through this traumatic, I have to pick you up to clean you thing. And I have been working on it, and honestly, it's not going as quickly as I would expect, but it's also an older snake that's set in its ways. It's been doing this for many, many years. It's about 14 or 10 years old. And it's going to be a time, I have to meet it at its level. But it's a new way of doing something that I've never done. So it could be my fault that it isn't going as swimmingly as it could possibly be. But because of talking with her on the podcast, I really learned something different. I also bring up Amy again, Greg. I keep forgetting her name.
Yeah, Amy Benzie,
who keeps emerald tree boas. And she keeps them, and they are super friendly, super calm. They're as interactive for her as ball pythons are. And it's a remarkable thing for me as a keeper who has had several come through the rescue to think that this animal can be free handled, or this animal can be interacted with in such a way that it learns to trust you. I mean, you were just talking about retics 15 years ago, 20 years ago, nobody wanted a retic.
Yep.
The only way to keep them friendly was to overfeed the crap out of them and make them so lazy that they didn't want to eat you.
Yeah.
Like that was it. And I mean, I'm not saying that was wrong for anybody. It led to the generations in captivity that we have now, which even mainlands in captivity now are very calm by comparison. So
yep.
It's being able to have conversations like this, being able to take in new information and use and apply that information is absolutely remarkable for people. That's one of the reasons Greg and I started this podcast. I didn't think my eyes were going to open this much, but I'm very happy they have and did. And I'm sure as guests continue to ask us to be part of this, that my eyes will continue to open and even learn more and more and more. And hopefully we can bring that and convey that to the general public while they're watching this. And I'm sorry, I'm talking with my hands today. I don't know, too much caffeine, maybe. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I drank an entire cup of tea right before we started. See, look, here it is again. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my hands.
The algorithm likes it when hands are in
his face. Italian at all, Brian?
What?
Are you part Italian at all?
I don't know. I'm a Eastern European mutt for the most part.
Yeah, well, you might. Maybe you do.
But maybe. But I mean, it's just learning is always something important. Whether we're talking about society and the way inclusivity means, or what inclusivity means, what to be inclusive means, we need to learn and adapt and change as we're presented with new information. I mean, all scientists do. That's one of the forefront understandings of science, is that when you are presented new information, you have to change your understanding.
Yeah, it's the same thing nature does when it evolves.
Yep.
Like, we're just along for the ride.
Agreed.
We can either fight it or we can move with it.
That's right. Yeah. Or get left behind.
Behind. Yeah.
It's one of those
lonely
things.
Back there.
Yeah, it's one of those things, we don't want to be an extinct species. But yeah, I think Greg, did you have any more to add? Because I did not, and I think we got through your list pretty well today.
Yeah. No, I mean, I do want to plug something that I learned today, but
sure,
we can. I'll just do it now.
Yeah, just do it.
I didn't even know this existed, but because somebody I follow in Connecticut posted it on Instagram, now I do, and I'm really excited about it. It's the NEPARC, the Northeast Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. They are going to be at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, July 23rd through the 25th.
Nice.
I'm not 100% sure what it is. I'm guessing that it's like I'm guessing it's educational. Obviously, it's at Wesleyan University.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
But I think that would be a good, opportunity for people in the Northeast to kind of meet people who maybe aren't necessarily keepers and are part of like on the ground conservation, like stopping construction projects and things like that from disturbing habitats. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of that there.
Oh yeah,
so
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
But I'm also going to post something on Instagram about it as well.
There you go.
So
the positive side of social media.
Yes, sharing crucial and important information.
Yes.
Yep.
That's what it's for. That's what it was designed for. All this other stuff is crazy.
Everything else is just mindless.
But I really appreciate it, Abby. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. It was great.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was great.
We welcome
Probably
you
talk
back
for another
anytime.
2 hours.
I could as well. That's definitely a casualty flow of being able to talk. I think is talking endlessly in the same, always making good factual points, but being able to just continue is really, really, really an interesting ability. But we look forward to having you a second time, hopefully.
Yeah, I am definitely all about that. And one last thing I will say is, as people are going through and listening to the podcast, if someone has any like recommendations or feedback on anything that I personally said about inclusivity in the community, like please like comment below or feel free to reach out to me. Personally, I'm always open for feedback and things that I can do better. So
awesome.
Just want to throw that
We'll definitely include a link to some way to contact you within the body of the podcast.
Awesome.
But yeah, thank you very much again for being here. We appreciate it greatly.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate both you and Greg for all of the great information y'all are sharing on your podcast. I think you're approaching it in a different way, which I think is really cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Feedback.
Yeah, our feedback. We appreciate it greatly. It's all about bringing the right stuff to the table.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Greg, do you need me or do you want me to just stop it?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Everyone have a great
awesome. Well, enjoy the rest of your
Sunday. Yep. Bye, everyone.